One. Hello, this is Mark Anderson with the Chattanooga Writers Guild, and tonight we are interviewing members of the Ekphrastic Writers Group, and it is December 3rd, 2020. We're still in COVIDville, in the middle of a global pandemic, and so Chattanooga Writers Guild is not meeting in person like we have done for many years at the downtown library. We are in the virtual world like most everyone else. So we're glad that we can get together, and it's very cold outside anyway, so it's good to be inside where it's warm.
Yeah.
And I'm going to introduce our members first. John C. Mannone, raise your hand, John, so they know who I'm talking about. He's a retired university physics professor. He has poems published many places, a few of which are the North Dakota Quarterly, Foreign Literary Journal, La Mentor, Poetry South, Baltimore Review, and others. He was awarded the Carol Owen Memorial Fiction Award and the Jean Ritchie Fellowship in Appalachian Literature. He is the poetry editor for ABIS and Apex and other journals. He has also been a member of Chattanooga Writers Guild for an awful long time. He's been on the board for 10 years. He served as president from 2016 to 2019. And he active in a couple of other writers groups. He co-leads the Creative Nonfiction and Poetry Group, and he's active in the Rogue Christian Writers Anonymous. And at the end of this video, there's going to be some slides, and it'll show his WordPress site if you want to read or find out more about him. And then we have Anne Thronfield-Long. Anne is the co-author of Tennessee Women of Vision and Courage. And she found her voice in journalism for many years prior to publishing poetry in Artemis, Riddled with Arrows, Ekphrastic Review, and others. She's a retired nurse and first responder. She studies American Sign Language. She has been an active member in the Chattanooga Writers Guild, as well as other writers organizations, the Knoxville Writers Guild and the Tennessee Poetry Society, and you're a board member on there. Is that right?
Yes.
What's your position?
Vice President.
Vice President, okay. Then we have Michelle Young. Michelle has been published in the poetry anthology Blanket Stories, and as well as Festival Writer, Sestina's special issue, American Diversity Report, and others. She enjoys traveling, that inspires her writing. Michelle and her husband, Corey Green, reside here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Michelle has also been a member of Chattanooga Writers Guild for a very long time, but she's served on the board. She's past vice president, and we'll also post her website on a slide at the end. And in addition to all those wonderful things, these three people are personal good friends, and that's part of what Chattanooga Writers Guild does for people. Some of my best, most amazing friendships have been made in this organization. So let's see, I wanted to ask a little bit about this group, Ekphrastic. What is the name of it? The formal, do you have a name?
Yeah, it's at least Ekphrastic Workshop is that the earlier versions had online workshop, which is almost understood these days, but Ekphrastic Workshop is probably good enough.
You know, I've told the other groups the same thing. What is it with these names? That is like the most boring name. Okay, you think, I mean, where's the creativity in that name? How about the Ekphrastics? You know, that's more like a band name.
That's
It sounds like we're
We
a
should
musical
sing.
band.
The
yeah.
Ekphrastics.
Miss, y'all can do
Yeah.
it.
So
Right.
I can put the paper to my lips and blow the wind over it. And it can make a fluttering sound. We're the Ekphrastics.
There you go.
And
It'll
play
make
the
you
cone.
ecstatics.
Writers of amazing images. Imagination writers, fantabulous.
Balloons and
Of course, okay.
popsicles.
Ekphrastic, the word is kin to supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. So it's
So
just almost like
considerably
a short
shorter.
way of saying that and
Yeah.
putting everything together. It's a bright, sparkly word anyway. So not one
Yeah.
you run across very often.
Yeah, it's not your typical word. It comes from the Greek, as you probably know, ek meaning out of, and phrasis for speech. To speak out is the original Greek meaning, but of course it has a whole lot more meaning than just to speak out. It's because it's relative to art. It's speaking out about art is really the context for the word, and it's one art form speaking out in another art form or for another form. It's almost like art begetting art.
Okay. So what are some examples of it? Is this a new thing? Is this the latest hip thing in poetry, or where did this come from?
Oh gosh, it goes back centuries, literally. And originally, the whole concept of ekphrasis is to go ahead and describe an object so that it is represented in a different art form, and that re-expression is not necessarily verbal. I mean, for example, you could see or gaze upon a sculpture,
Yeah.
and you can describe that in words, what you see, but and that would qualify as a comprehensive record or detail of that. It could be a musical composition that captures the emotion of the chisel marks or whatever the sculptor was trying to achieve. So it's a reinterpretation. There's some truth, but also some imagining. And in fact, oftentimes there's a lot of imagining. So in the very distant past, one will argue that Ekphrasis showed up as in one art form, usually literary, describing another piece of art in detail.
So can I go ahead and this is what this is Paul Getty Museum Education. They have this on their website. A simple Google gives you. So it originally does mean just describing something. But it says has come to be defined as poems written about works of art. However, in ancient Greece, the term ekphrasis was applied to the skill of describing a thing with vivid detail.
Yes.
One of the earliest examples of ekphrasis can be found in Homer's epic poem, the Iliad, in which the speaker elaborately describes the shield of Achilles.
Yeah.
In nearly 150 poetic lines. There's a couple of them here. It starts out, says, and the first Hephaestus makes a great and massive shield, blazoning well-wrought emblems across its surface. And he goes on like that, like it says, 150 lines talking about this significant object. Then it says, typically, though, it goes on to include an exploration of how the speaker is impacted by his or her experience with this work.
Yeah.
For example, John Keats' Ode on a Grecian Urn. And then they give an example of, there's a picture, a work of art, The Power of Ekphrasis. It says there's this famous painting and a man. I'm getting sidetracked. Maybe I better cut this short. But the American poet Edward Markham wrote a poem about the backbreaking. The art was John Francois Millet's painting, Man with a Hoe.
Hmm.
And the American writes this poem about it, and it ended up being very influential at the turn of the 20th century. It was published in 1899, and it was reprinted. His poem was published in 1899. It was reprinted in thousands of newspapers and magazines across the country. So here's the beginning of the poem. Bowed by the weight of centuries, he leans upon his hoe and gazes on the ground, the emptiness of ages in his face, and on his back the burden of the world. Who loosened and let down this brutal jaw? Whose was the hand that slanted back his brow? Whose breath blew out the light within his brain?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a powerful poem inspired by a work of art.
Yeah.
But in this case, you see that the work of art represents much more than just a pin. I mean, it encompasses so much of life. So he's talks about the work of art, but it's just a launching point for this example anyway, to
Right.
talk about major issues in life. So we're going to go on and talk about, I wanted to ask before we go on any further on this art thing, why do you members participate in this group? You could write these things at home alone. Anyone could pull up a picture and look at it and write a poem about it or be inspired by it. But what is it that makes you want to be a member of this group? Why do you participate? Annie or Michelle, do you have a thought on that?
Go ahead, Annie.
Well, I think it's because all of us are writing at the same time, and we're going to bring it together and share it with each other. That's knowing that somebody else is going to hear it or read it makes a difference to me. And reading it to John and Michelle, they're going to comment on what I've done. And so there comes a mutual understanding of where this object or picture has taken me. But often two of us will kind of get the same idea, and one of us will have a totally different take. And so it opens my world.
It's interesting because sometimes a couple of us will use the same word in a poem, which is sort of rare, or would normally be rare. And I like that. It's very interesting, but I appreciate the honest, positive critique that I get from these guys. I can learn so much from them, and I do every time. And I love having different perspectives on my work. It just helps me grow. And also having it weekly gives me a deadline. Has gotten me in the swing of writing regularly or semi-regularly again, because I always want to have something ready for our meetings. And John comes up with some great prompts, and it's fun. I love seeing where these images will take my mind.
What about you, John?
Oh gosh, the ladies said it rather well. There's something synergistic about the collective approach, and then just to see how we learn from each other. It's not just writing a poem or a piece of prose or whatever. One could actually write a recipe. Food's another form of poetry. Whatever art form happens, it's not a solitary action. It's there's some really good things, but there's something else that's working here with ekphrastic prompts, and that is it's an indirect answer to the question that many writers have, whether they're poets or not, and that is something that they call writer's block. And that's basically just the inability or the stumping of you're stuck in a place and you don't know how to move on, and it's frustrating, and that deepens the vicious cycle, and nothing gets done. And one of the solutions that I adhere to strongly, that I think really works, is that when you're stuck in one form of art, go to another form of art, and subconsciously you're relaxing as well as being energized at the same time. So Ekphrasis almost does that automatically. You may be stuck on some idea that you've been thinking, and you see a picture that there's the thing it's going to trigger that thing that you've been thinking about but didn't know how to make it happen. And so the Ekphrasis in this case becomes a trigger for something that's been wanting to get born. And that's one of the beautiful things about this.
Sometimes too, the prompts, you don't have to necessarily write exactly into that particular scenario. A lot of times it's just a springboard to take you sometimes even in a whole nother direction.
Yes, that's right. And in that case, the prompt acts as an inspiration for something totally different. I wouldn't call it Ekphrasis at that point, because it's just a picture, or whatever the art thing is will stimulate you, as Michelle just said, in some other direction. It was just a jumping off point.
But
The
you can tie
Ekphrasis
it
really,
in. You tie it back in, though, into that image.
Yeah.
It's not like I see a bowl of cereal and start thinking cars, you know.
Yeah. Yes.
Unless I'm
yes.
thinking about Cheerios and wheels and stuff like that.
Right. The Ekphrasis. One other thing that the Ekphrastic work does that we haven't talked about, and it is a broad term. It's called rhetorical. That it's got to be rhetorical. It's got to ask a question or try to answer it. So it goes beyond what you see and really taps into your imagination. You see a statue of two people and you describe the statue, but you also imagine their conversation, for example. And that's, as you describe the sculpture, for example, you would also be interjecting imagined conversation. So the poem or whatever you're writing takes on a new life that transcends the original artwork. It becomes its own new artwork. An inspiration would be, okay, you see a sculpture of two people, and then you start writing about a romantic interlude you may have had, and has and other than the statue stimulating that idea, it has otherwise nothing to do with your poem. I would not call that Ekphrasis or Ekphrastic poem, because it maybe I'm cutting hairs, but
I just had a flash of literary infinity mirror, where you take a photo of a sculpture. So you actually, if we're keying off of the photo, but there's actually the art beyond the photo, which is the sculpture itself to start with.
Yes.
So you sort of get that infinity loop thing going on.
Yeah, and it all depends on which one of us brings to it. Michelle being an artist, a singer, and each of us bring our backgrounds to what picture or a painting might mean. One time John did fire. It was like a picture of a campfire. And it's amazing what things you can see in a fire. It's like a Rorschach test. It says more about you than it does about the picture. It tells who you are.
Maybe we should try it with pictures of clouds.
In fact, one of the prompts we did.
Let's get some samples of your writings. Let's see, we didn't assign an order. Probably we should go with John last. and allow him. Annie, are you ready to share yours?
Sure.
Annie,
I
Michelle,
don't have it to share on the screen.
But what
Because-
about the prompt? Maybe I can put it up if you don't have it handy, Annie.
I'm not sure I remember what the prompt was. Did we have one on butterflies? Did you do? That's what I wrote about.
We had the monarch,
Yeah.
but
let
that
me-
was
I
that was
want to see if I can find my file folder that
Okay.
see if I get triggered real fast here.
Well, let's see. Should I pause the recording while we see if we can find all this?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Is there a pause here? Pause. Resume. Okay, we're back. Annie's going to tell us what inspired her poem, because we don't have a picture of it.
Yeah. It was actually a picture of a campfire. And when I was thinking what to write, the phrase drawn like a moth to a flame came to mind. And so I jumped from moth to butterfly. And a monarch, I think, is probably the best known butterfly to me. So I wrote this poem, Mariposa Monarcha, and it is published in quill and parchment. Mariposa Monarcha. On my way to see my mother in Evergreen, I stay overnight in Colby. Sunflowered flatland charms me, and births memories of snapping beans in the swing, sitting by my grandmother who tells family stories in the long shadowed afternoons. In my hotel room, I open the curtains and outside I see floating leaves? No, hundreds of butterflies elbowing the sky, a popsicle colored wingding, a kelly, a corroboree that showers me. I take smeared photographs. I can hardly wait to tell. I saw the monarchs. The next day when I get there, mother cannot hear. The thrill of migration caught her up. She'd flown away. I stop alongside the long road home to Tennessee and fill my pockets with milkweed seeds.
Lovely. Wow. I want to go ahead and share that image that Annie just was inspired by, because I finally found it. And do you see that campfire type thing?
Yeah.
And the top of it looks like a little moth.
Yes.
Like there's a moth floating over it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks, John.
you bet.
All right. Well, there's a lot of nice images in that, isn't there? A whole story
Yeah.
Yeah.
with the swing. What's that line? Beans in the swing.
Snapping beans
Snapping
in the
beans in the
swing with
swing.
my grandmother. Yeah, all this is true.
Yeah. It's a lovely, lovely poem.
Thank you.
I'm so glad
right.
it's published.
I was really thankful about quill and parchment, and that's a good place to publish. It's very easy to submit, and I have trouble doing that, as everybody knows.
Michelle, what do you have to share?
I have a poem called Onward, Upward, and let me get the image here. Okay.
Ah,
Okay.
Okay.
Nice.
I count concrete stairs, 3 more until the next plateau, then 12 to the top. My knees ache, rickety joints of an antique automaton, rusted hinges grinding bone against cartilage. but I climb one by one, slow feet grazing dead leaves, popping crisp, dry twigs, crunching errant acorns into mash for squirrels and deer. On the landing, I pause, survey the mountain around me. Fall is coming into her own, a garment of leaves, gold and fire, peppered with remnants of summer green. Shoes brittle umber that melts into cool, damp earth, where snails and roly-polies hope to remain hidden. My nostrils flare as I inhale, breath still desperate and deep from the steep climb. Scent of distant campfire merges with nature, transports me back to camping trips, hiking when I could sprint up these stairs, feel put out while waiting for slow adults. I learned hard lessons about substituting poison oak for toilet paper, avoiding disturbed yellow jacket nests, losing carefully toasted marshmallows to the fire gods, and speaking rash, hateful words when you think someone can't hear, but by a chance of fate, they can and do. The chill wind nips playfully. I turn my jacket collar up, slip my hands into fleece-lined pockets, and continue to climb. 12 steps to the next level, a new outlook, enlightenment.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. And that picture is from the Joyce Kilmer National Forest.
So that poem was pretty directly, we can see all the connections there with the image and your experience, but it seems like it went further because you weren't actually physically at those steps, but somehow mentally you were, or went into another experience.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain it a little bit?
Yeah, I put myself into the picture as if I were climbing those stairs. I even counted the stairs in the photo and imagined what it would be like climbing all of them right now, as opposed to when I was a little youngster, you know, bopping around, popping up the stairs, you know, you can run up and down and you see, hurry up, you know, and the adults are like, you remember when you're a kid and everybody's, I wish I had as much energy as she does, or I wish I had as much energy as he does. And now I'm the adult, you know, and I'm the one whose the knees are grinding as you're going up the stairs, and you can smell, you know, I imagine that I smell a campfire in the distance, you know, because that's something typical of what you might smell in a park near campgrounds or something. And I did pull upon some of my own personal experiences in that poem from like Girl Scout camp when I was a Girl Scout at Camp Adahi. You know, we even we had outhouses. You know, we used the laws or latrines back then, so it wasn't a totally primitive experience because we had tents that were on raised platforms, and we did have a cafeteria or a mess hall that we could go to. But just all of those experiences, even the poison oak, that was a thing. That was a hard lesson learned.
Yes, indeed. You learned it well.
Yes, I learned about poison oak and poison ivy and other things in Girl Scouts. But those were the slap me in the face experiences that I learned from.
So for you, the ekphrastic was a combination of the image and where it took you to. I guess this is common.
It's like a melding into a fantasy world. And that's the cool thing about writing, especially if it's fiction or fiction poetry or something, is that it doesn't have to be, well, Bill Brown always says, you know, you don't have to tell the story, tell your story, because all the details don't have to mesh up from one particular singular experience, but all of your experiences together can meld into giving you a poem like the one I just read to you from just one image.
Mhm.
All right. And when you wrote that, how many revisions? Is that kind of what we heard tonight? How long of a process was that?
Wow. First I have to tip my hat to John, who is the master revisionist.
Yeah.
And
Amen.
Annie also is really good at revising. I do a lot of revising as I go. I try to find my words as carefully as possible. Sometimes maybe I put something down that doesn't sit quite right, and I know I can go back to it. But I'm really bad at editing as I go, and I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing or a good thing, but I just try to make sure I'm as careful as possible to say exactly what I want to say when I'm putting it down on paper. So I don't normally do, like, this was probably as I went along. I know I revised certain things, you know, maybe 4 or 5 times. I probably revised as I was going. So, but an overall revision or something that I revisit, for me, it might just be a matter of 1 or 2 revisions. But again, it could be either a combination of my inexperience and just the fact that I choose my words so carefully, or maybe it's just something that I'm finally happy with by the time I get the last revision out. But I don't do as much revision. John, like I said, John is the master revisioner, and he's really good at that, at tweaking it till it gets just the way he wants it. But I'm more as a perfectionist as I go along.
Hey, John, are you ready to pull up your visual prompt?
Yeah, first let me do that. You've seen the fire, which is semi-concrete. It stimulated something abstract, and you've seen something rather concrete and how that stimulated something. And now I want to share with you something quite abstract. I mean, I know what this is because I took the picture, but I didn't reveal that to Annie and Michelle until after the fact. Here's an image of something, I'm going to say, and there's lots of color and lots of it's almost like a piece of abstract art. And so what can come out of this? And I'll tell you what it is after I read my poem. I think I have to stop share first. Am I right?
Well, you can leave that up while you read your poem if you don't want to.
Okay, I got you. So you don't. Okay, the poem is all one verse of medium length lines. I call it Foreign Exchange. They came with their promises of a better life, a better world. So we exchanged our resources for their technology, medicines, at least for a while until we saw their true intentions. Slavery is never good for the oppressed. We began to disappear without explanation. They simply smiled. So we rebelled. We would prefer to die than be seduced as captives or commodity. We lost their favor. Rebellion must have soured our savor. And so they finally left. Their spaceships and moss lifted off our soil in a high-pitched hum. The people rejoiced once again. But I stayed in my cave, hidden, and watched the aliens flare in the light of our sun. A bright flash of lightning, a farewell to us. I saw our cities incinerate in that golden laser glow, our rivers overflowing red with our blood.
All right. Thanks
So,
for coming.
yeah, you bet. So you can see where my mind went towards the speculative on this one, and all those marks in the granite, which was a countertop at a local pub and grill. The one's called Big River Grill. The outside counter, and that was, I guess, my glass of beer, and the sunlight was shining through it and cast that sharp golden shadow. And so out of that image came that speculative poem.
I remember that one. See, now just to show you the differences, I think Annie and I went really dark on that one as well. I pictured it as an old pockmarked, scarred man's back.
Yeah.
Rivulets of blood.
Yes,
Like
yes,
he
yes.
was
Yeah.
ill, and it was a map of scars and moles and stuff
Mm.
on his back.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Annie, do you remember exactly what you wrote about that prompt?
I think it had something to do with veins.
Yeah, I think so
and-
too.
And illness. Yeah.
Yeah. Blood and
Yeah.
things.
Blood
So,
and gore.
yeah. Blood and gore.
Yeah.
Here's a
John
question for
to the
you, son.
scar.
If I
Go up.
was to go outside and see something in nature, a waterfall, sunset,
Mm-hmm.
bird, and that inspired me to write something,
Mm-hmm.
would that be Ekphrasis?
It surely could be.
Yeah.
It surely could be, because nature itself is a beautiful piece of art.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I would say so. And then the old context of Ekphrasis of just writing with poetic words a description of that natural scene would be considered a nature poem. And that may be the old definition of Ekphrasis, but what it's evolved to mean, you have to say something more. Yeah, there has to be some rhetoric. The question asked, and maybe possibly answered, and that always goes right to the human condition. And so, in my opinion, that's when that kind of writing transcends description and becomes a poem instead of just a merely elegant description of nature.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been a very fascinating introduction to Ekphrasis and ekphrastic writing.
Mhm.
You guys focus mostly on poetry, or are you open to
Yeah, we're open to everything.
everything? Are you
Yeah.
open to new members?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And they should be members of the Chattanooga Writers Guild. I'm sure they can, on our website, there's a tab there for writing groups. And if anyone is interested, they just go on there and they contact you, and you post these. Currently, you're posting these prompts on the Facebook group
Mhm.
where they can go and engage with them there. But I think this is an example of what our Chattanooga Writers Guild is all about. We're all about, well, I believe that we write better in community.
Yeah, I agree.
That's why
Yeah.
I participate. That it's through rubbing shoulders with other writers, be inspired by others, and challenged to write better. Influence. Anytime you hang around.
Critique.
What's that?
Critique is a big deal.
Critique, yeah.
Critique.
Yeah.
I like inspire more than critique, but it helps. We go over that. I know. This is one of my, yes, we have critique groups, but hopefully they're inspiration groups too.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
That's
We
sure what I
we
need.
not only have an opportunity to write and share and even critique if the gathering is small enough where we can do that, but we also talk about craft. We talk about where the poems could be published, various resources,